Welcome back to our second and final remote session of this semester. And we're going to take a look at administering Windows 7. We're going to go through the contents of the slide deck, has some things I'd like to tell you about, some different principles and concepts I want you to take a look at. And then I'm also going to demo some of the things on a couple of virtual machines that I have loaded up here for you. So let's go ahead and get started with our lesson on administering Windows 7. Don't forget that Thursday night, JMac will be there with you. He'll be administering your quiz over this material, and you'll find that the quiz study guide is already up in Angel. And then following the quiz, there is a lab that will be in Angel as well. Go ahead and open that lab up, go through the contents of that lab. And just like we did last week, as you go through each of the bullet points on the lab, John will either sign off on it or have a student designated to sign off on it, and then we'll get that information to me to show that you've successfully completed the lab task as assigned. So the first thing we're going to talk about tonight is troubleshooting Windows 7. Then we'll take a look at some of the remote access technologies that are part of Windows 7. We'll look at remote desktop, we'll talk about remote assistance, distinguish the differences between those two, and then see which one works in what particular situation. We'll also talk about installation and startup issues and some of the things that you can do to detect what those issues are. We're not going to really deal with specific troubleshooting as far as, hey, my machine wouldn't start, there's this symptom, well, what do I do? But we're going to talk about how you divine what those symptoms are, how you would look at the operating system and determine possibly where the problem might lie. We'll then discuss briefly branch cache, which I want to tell you what it is so that you're aware of it, but I will tell you that it's version 1.0, and you know what we say about version 1.0 of anything. And also, it's just not, I'm not convinced that it has a very broad appeal, and so we'll take a look at that. Then we'll finish off tonight talking about backup and restore options that are available to us in Windows 7. First, with troubleshooting, first bullet point here makes it clear this is the primary function of a desktop support technician. Our users call us because they don't know what to do with the system. You know, their job is to keep producing whatever it is our company does, produce widgets or phone calls or whatever, but their job is to keep working. Our job is to keep those computers working. And oftentimes this involves troubleshooting. The user's going about performing their task, and all of a sudden the machine isn't doing what they expect it to. And so it's up to us to be able to troubleshoot this. Good troubleshooters are often intuitive. You know, you won't always find this information written out for you bullet point by bullet point in a list. There's not always going to be a flow chart you can go through. You certainly do need to have some standardized steps that you would go through. You know, some typical questions you might ask the user. Open-ended questions if you have a user that is fairly savvy. Questions like, what is the problem? Tell me what it did. Those are open-ended questions that allow the user to elaborate. The problem with an open-ended question, however, is that you are dependent then upon your user's understanding of the technology. Because when you ask them what's going on and they describe it to you, they're describing it to the best of their ability. And if they do not have a good understanding of the environment, then, you know, though what they're telling you is accurate in their eyes, technically it's not going to be accurate. So we probably then would resort to some closed-ended questions. Do you see your desktop? Do you see this particular icon on your desktop? Right-click on this icon and describe to me what happens. You know, very almost yes and no questions, not exclusively yes and no, but very targeted questions so that they have a definitive answer they can provide for you. So open-ended questions tend to be when we deal with the more technical users or the more apt users, and then closed-ended questions when maybe the user doesn't have a very comprehensive understanding of what it is they're looking at. And it mentions here it allows you to explain to the client, share your findings, and account for your time. Okay, I see Microsoft threw that in there as a bullet point. You know, one thing you do want to keep in mind, talk about explaining yourself to the client. Users don't always need to know exactly what you're doing. but they certainly need to know that you're working on their issue. So when you get that help desk ticket or when you take that initial phone call, give them some idea of a time frame. And then once you've given them a time frame, keep them updated. They don't have to know every step, but they certainly need to know that what you're working on, and that yes, sir, you're working on their problem today, or no, I won't get to your problem until tomorrow. So that's just some of the overall concepts and such we'll take a look at with troubleshooting. As far as the troubleshooting procedure goes, I don't really care so much what your troubleshooting procedure is. I simply care that you have a troubleshooting procedure. What I mean by that is you have a logical series of steps you're going to go through. We need to determine what the symptoms are, figure out the scope of the problem. Is it limited to one user? Is it the entire network? Is it one department? Try to determine what the scope of the problem is. Figure out what's changed. In the vast majority of the instances when a user calls you and something worked yesterday and it doesn't work today, the vast majority of the time, something has changed. Now keep in mind, all end users suffer from the end user reflex. So when you ask them, what did you do? Their first response is going to be nothing. But dig a little bit. Maybe somebody else was in there working the night before. Maybe the carpets were cleaned and computers got moved around, or maybe they don't want to admit to you that they installed a screensaver that they downloaded off of some website. But so start to ask some questions. Don't just take nothing for an answer. Figure out what has changed. Software does not spontaneously reconfigure itself. If it worked yesterday and it doesn't work today, there's a reason. Sometimes it's a hardware failure, but you will find that is a very, very small percentage of the time. Usually there's been something reconfigured on the software side. Always start, Mike Mallard, just like you said the other day, start with the easiest solution first, right? You always start with layer one. Always start with the physical layer. The simpler the solution, the cheaper the fix is going to be. And so always start with the cheapest, easiest ideas and work your way up. Select the most probable cause. In the vast majority of instances, the simplest answer will be the right answer. And so just start with the simple, probable issues and work your way up from there. Implement a solution. Come up with a series of steps that you need the user to go through. Maybe it's just have the user give you remote access to their system and you go through them. But document a step-by-step solution. Test the result. Make sure that when you fix this one problem, you're not creating another one. And then once all this is done, document. Really the holy grail of networking is the over-documented network. It takes time to document. It takes discipline to document. But especially if you're sitting at help desk, if you don't document your solutions, I promise you will repeat them. And what I mean by that is you're going to go through the time and the work to troubleshoot something, and 3 weeks later, a month later, 6 months later, somebody's going to call and describe the exact same problem to you. If you documented the solution, you're going to be able to pull that information up, and you've just cut your time to resolution down significantly. If you did not document your resolution, then you're going to have to start all over diagnosing this, figuring out what you did, figuring out how you can fix the problem. So take a few extra minutes and document the solution. Documentation is not urgent, but it is very, very important. And so make sure you take the time to document the solution that you come up with. Now, some of the troubleshooting tools that Microsoft provides us, specifically here they mention remote assistance, remote desktop, and then also the recovery tools that are part of the Windows installation media. These are tools that Microsoft provides us just to help us ascertain what's going on in the environment. And like I mentioned earlier, you can't always trust the user to accurately describe something to you. And so if at all possible for you to be able to get in there and peek over their shoulder and see what's going on. And you know what, if you can't do that, if for some reason you don't have a live connection and you're not able to do that, if they're running Windows 7, remember the discussion we had in class a few weeks ago about using the problem steps recorder, so that you can generate a series of screenshots that shows you everything that's gone on with the system. So we'll take a look at some of the remote access solutions. First, we'll talk about redirecting a snap-in. We'll take a look at the remote assistance, remote desktop, and then we'll mention Windows Remote Management. As far as the MMC goes, let's get out of the slide deck here and take a look at this in its in context. And so what I've got here are a couple of machines I've fired up. And so here you see a Windows 7 machine. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to connect up to the services snap-in on another machine. And so we're just going to go and we're going to fire up an MMC. And now let's go ahead and let's add the snap-in for services. And right here, what computer? We'll go ahead and tell it we want to do it on another computer. And we're going to point it to another machine I have out here, which is Mail 1, which is a Server 2008 machine running Exchange. So now we'll go ahead and give this a second. It's not going to be an instant connection. It's going to take a minute for it to go ahead and make its connection and to authenticate. Really, any second now. No, trust me, really, any second now. There we go. And so now you can see on Whack Whack Mail 1, so on that remote server, here we've got a listing of all of our all the services that are running, and we can configure those remotely. What you're going to find when you move beyond this class and beyond the idea of the help desk and you start talking about the server environment is that you're very rarely going to go and interactively log on to a machine. And so technologies like this, which we can use on the help desk to allow us to remotely connect to a user, diagnose what's going on. We can also use these for our normal day-to-day work in the server environment. And so that's why using an Exchange server here to connect to, not a problem. Windows Server 2008, Windows 7, exact same kernel operating system, just a few bells and whistles that are different. That's it. So that's just a quick example of how to connect up by redirecting an MMC. Now, just for clarity's sake, if I were to go here and open up the services applet on my Windows 7 machine, I could also right-click it and say connect to another computer. So I don't have to build this MMC from scratch. I can go ahead and do it within the context of the MMC on the local machine as well. Back to our slides. The next thing that Microsoft makes available to us is remote assistance. And remote assistance is distinguished from remote desktop in the interaction you have with the user. With remote assistance, you are able to, or your client is able to issue an invitation. They ask you, please come help me. And so a password is generated. This password is now automatically generated. We don't have the ability to disable that easily. And then you take the invitation that was generated by the user, you respond to that, you provide the password that was there, and then you're able to connect up to their current session on the machine. They see what you're doing. You can copy files over to the machine, so you need a file there to repair something. You can send them the file. They have to then approve receipt of the file. And so let's take a look at how remote assistance will work with these same boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up here. Oops, let me get rid of that. I'll fire up here on my Windows 7 machine. I hit F1 for help, and then the ask button, and you see right here, ask a person for help. So we're going to go ahead and use Windows Remote Assistance, and we're going to invite someone we trust to help. Notice you can do this, send the invitation, send the email, send the invitation and email, excuse me, or we're going to go ahead and choose to do it with a file. You can also do it with a Quick Connect cable, an Easy Connect, but that's impractical. So typically we're going to be using save as a file or an email. So we're going to go ahead and save the invitation as a file. And ask me where to put it, so we'll go ahead and put it up on the desktop. And you see here it's going to generate a password. And we're currently in a waiting state. You'll notice right here, waiting for the incoming connection. So let's go ahead and, excuse me there, let's see here. All right, sorry about that. We'll go ahead and document this password. So I'm going to go ahead and use the snipping tool and just grab this password. And I'm just going to move it over here to the side, not quite like that, so that I can see that when I need it. Okay, now this machine is going to stay as it is, waiting for that incoming connection. So now I'm going to go to a Windows XP machine I've got running, and we're going to take this XP machine, and oops, I forgot to grab the invitation. Excuse me. Let's grab that invitation file, and let's copy it and move it over here to my desktop. And now, where'd it go? There it is. Now let's go to the Windows XP machine. Let's grab this invitation file. Let me get with the one I had over here earlier. Now let's grab this new invitation file, drag it over, and drop it. Now when we execute the invitation, it goes ahead and says, hey, Ernie wants some help. Now notice here, expires on. You can go into the configuration for remote assistance and set up a finite lifespan for this connection. So if the person is not available to answer it within a reasonable period of time, then you're going to close that connection. So let's go here and take a look at our password, which is HH6X, and this is case sensitive, VGBT, XY79. And what you're going to see now, look here, you see status, it's waiting for an answer. I'm going to go over to the Windows 7 box, and it says right here, hey, would you like to allow Ernie to connect to your computer? So I'm going to say yes. And so now if I go back to the Windows XP machine, you can see here I'm looking at that user's desktop. Now, I can't currently do anything on here. I can chat. And what you'll notice is when we go back to the Windows 7 machine, here you go, help has arrived. Now, I can go back to my XP box and I can ask to take control of the user system. Well, now you'll notice they have to allow me control. So yes, allow Ernie to control it. And so now I can come back over here and notice here I'm now in control of that computer. So I can move things around. I can manipulate what's going on here now. I can send a file. Then I would have to browse to the file I wanted to send over. It's got to be something. I will send that installation file there. And now we have to wait for the user to say, yes, I want to take that file. So you can see how what this allows you to do is be into the user's machine. They are fully aware that you're there. Matter of fact, they really have to be there for you to be able to do much of anything. There are some other tools available out there that you could use for this same type of work that are free as well, like VNC, Virtual Network Computing. VNC's been around a while, and you find a lot of shops will use that to allow a remote connection, which allows you to interact in real time with the user and their session. What we're going to do now is we're going to go here and we're going to sit at the Windows 7 machine, and we're going to go ahead and kill that connection. Notice you've been disconnected from Ernie's computer. So fine, we're done with that, and now everything's finished. So that's really what you're going to do with the remote desktop. Sorry about that. Pizza guy was at the door. Let's get, let's see, what we just finished up doing the remote remote access. Now we're going to take a look at remote desktop. So on the target machine, and we'll go ahead and do remote desktop. I'm going to go ahead and set it up here on my Windows 7 machine. Oops, my Windows 7 machine here. And so we're going to go to Computer, we're going to pull up Properties, and here you see the remote settings. So we're going to allow remote desktop, and we'll allow connections from computers running any version of Windows. And we can also specify particular users. Now, your administrative user will already have access. I'm going to go ahead and add a user from this machine. And that user will be tech support. So that user is allowed to come in. So I'll go ahead and I'll leave that property sheet open because I want you to see something here. So I'm going to go to the Exchange server. I'm going to type in a remote, and I'm going to do a remote desktop connection. Now, this will be the same whether the machine you're connecting from is Windows 7 or Server 2008. And here is my target machine. And I'm going to use another account, and I will use, let's see, that machine is my Win7 box / tech support. Okay, any second now. All right, now there's not a certificate matchup, which is fine. So we'll go ahead and use that anyway. So another communicating because he saw the certificate wasn't right. Now what it's doing right now, I would imagine, I'll get to it in a second, will be logging this user off of the other machine. Well, that is if we're using the same user. Now, we didn't use the same user this time, so that's, okay, another user is currently logged on. If you continue, this user has to disconnect from this computer because you can only do one session at a time here with Windows 7. So we're going to say yeah, and watch what it's doing. So he says, well, wait a minute, tech support wants to bounce you. So we could sit here and wait for 30 seconds. We'll just go ahead and agree and let it happen. Now you notice here, we lose the session here as a locally logged on user. But if we go back and look at our remote desktop, now have we logged on as the same user, the user who was already logged on to the target machine, it would not have asked for permission. And it would immediately log him off and give us his desktop. So anything he was running on his desktop would suddenly be here. But we used a different user, so that wasn't going to be the case now. And so now you can see I can fire up a command prompt. And I'm certainly on the Win7 box. And of course, we always have this wonderful little drop down here to let us know what's going on. So we're going to go ahead and we can, minimize that so that we can do other things on our system. But we're just going to go ahead and log off of this machine. And then it will return us to our normal desktop here as soon as that closes. And now, of course, this is still ready for somebody to log on. So know the distinction between remote assistance and remote desktop. As with remote assistance, you are in the same session as the user. With remote desktop, you are in a separate session. So that's the fundamental distinction between remote assistance and remote desktop. So let's get back to our slide deck and see where we stand here. Here we took a look at this property sheet in context, and just remember the distinction you're making here about whether you allow only connections from the same operating system or whether you allow backwards compatibility there as well. We created the invitation. We did that. We can secure remote assistance. They mention here, make sure that the invitations are certainly going to help secure it because A, we have a finite lifespan. B, there's a password associated with it. C, of course, you want the user to be sitting there so that if the person assisting them were to suddenly start to hand them a file or something that was going to be dangerous, not that the user would know, but that something that may be potentially dangerous, the user could stop it. If you, as the target, is the user, hit the escape key, you will automatically kill the remote connection. That's all it takes. You don't have to go find the right box to click or anything like that. All you have to do is hit escape, and that will kick the user right out. One great thing about remote assistance is it really does make its way through the remote firewalls very easily, because when you're out there listening for that connection, everything's in place to get out through the firewall. So it really works well in that you can sit at home and have your mom or somebody fire up an invitation, and you won't have any trouble at all connecting up through out through your ISP and into theirs. And here's a remote desktop client that we used just a moment ago. We saw it here in its minimal form. You can hit the options button right here, and you can choose to see some of the individual settings that are available there. I'd encourage you to do that. Just sit at your Windows 7 box, type the word remote, and when you see remote desktop connection come up, just click on it, hit options, and go through these various options that are available. One of the things Microsoft works very hard to do is to make sure that you're able to redirect some of your traffic to the local resources. Like if you're remoted into a system and you want to print something, is it going to print to the remote location, or is it going to print to your printer? So that type of redirection we can configure right here through the remote desktop connection client. Windows Remote Management. If you are going to create an MMC and connect up to a remote machine, what you need to do, or even to use remote desktop, as they mentioned here, or in addition to remote desktop, excuse me, what you'll need to do is you'll need to go to a command prompt, run as an administrator, elevated prompt, and you need to run winrm space quick config. This pokes the appropriate holes in the Windows firewall on that local machine so that you are listening for someone to attempt up to do a remote connection. And so once this is done, then you can take those MMC snap-ins and connect up to a remote machine. You can even then use WinRS, which is a command line tool that will allow you to remotely execute on the other user's machine. A bit deprecated these days because, who wants to do a lot of this from the command line? But it's been around forever, and it works. You can also remote with PowerShell. Now we'll play some more with PowerShell in our last couple of weeks as we lead up to the final exam. It is possible to use a suite of tools to remotely connect up to a different machine through PowerShell. Both your boxes you've had to have done WinRM quick config and get those up and running. Not the most intuitive and not something you're probably going to get into now, but as you spend more and more time with PowerShell, it's something that may be more attractive for you. Now let's talk about the Windows 7 startup process. Microsoft significantly changed the startup, the files that are involved and the process that the system goes through now to get you to the operating system. The first thing, and this is common to all, is going to be the post. And this really is pre-Windows. This is simply your motherboard powering up and running through a series of tests. And that's why the post is a POST, the power on self-test. This is where you'll count your RAM and make sure that the settings in the BIOS are correct. Now, on an awful lot of machines, you won't see any output. You'll see a splash screen during the post. But a lot of times you'll see there as that splash screen first pops up, it'll say hit tab to see the post. And so you can, it depends on the manufacturer of the motherboard, but you will find certainly some different manufacturers will give you different keystrokes that will allow you to bypass that splash screen and actually see what the post is doing, what the power on self-test is up to. We then enter the initial startup phase, and so here we've completed the post, and the system is ready to look for the boot controller, the BCD. Under previous versions of Windows, we had what was called the boot.ini file, and the boot.ini file would sit there at the root of C typically, and it would tell the computer how to find the operating system. It would tell it what controller, what hard drive on that controller, and what directory on that hard drive as far as where it would locate Windows. Well, now this has been replaced with the BCD, and it has become significantly more complex. If you wish to do anything with the BCD, as far as Microsoft's concerned, the only way you can really mess with it would be to do a BCD edit. I have to elevate. And here you see the contents of the BCD. And it does the same thing a boot.ini file did. It points you to location, how to find the hard drive, the operating system and such, what hard drive it's located on. You'll notice here if you do a BCD edit, and we take a look at the help information in there, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of switches, an awful lot you can do with that. Now, this is from Microsoft's point of view. I would recommend a program called EasyBCD, which allows you to control what the boot controller is doing from a small little GUI. And it's not a Microsoft product, but it certainly is something that makes messing with the boot controller a lot simpler. So the BCD then goes and finds the operating system. It then begins to copy the operating system up into memory and to load the kernel. The kernel is the core of the OS. It's the nervous system of the operating system. It's where the magic happens. And so once the kernel is loaded, at the completion of the kernel load, you will then have the ability to hit Control-Alt-Delete to log on, to go ahead and initiate your logon sequence. These are not necessarily discrete phases where it finishes one and goes directly into another. Just an example of that would be the kernel loading phase. The kernel loading phase, as it finishes, your machine will then be going out and doing what's called a get GPO list function, so that it requests from the domain controller a list of the group policy objects applied to this computer. You execute those group policy objects. At the conclusion of the execution of the GPOs, that's when you can initiate your logon sequence. And then just as a side note, after you initiate the logon sequence and you put in your username and your password, your machine does another get GPO list function where it then requests a list of group policy objects that apply to the user. Once those are executed, your desktop is built. So that's pretty much what happens during that startup process. The first step they mentioned here, determine where your startup where the startup process is failing. Look at post failures. Oftentimes, if there's a failure during the post, it will be indicated typically by a series of beeps. Now, those beeps are going to mean different things based upon who the motherboard manufacturer is. And so you may find yourself having to open up the computer and read the manufacturer and the model number off of the motherboard so you can go Google it and see what their beep codes mean. The beep code can be something as simple as there's is a memory error, which typically means that you've got a stick of RAM that's loose. It can be that the video card is unseated. I mean, there are all sorts of different errors, but it's typically a series of long and short beeps. So it'll tell you like 3 short beeps followed by a long beep equals this, or 2 long beeps followed by a short beep equals that. And so that's typically how post errors are indicated to you. If it's initial startup failure or a driver or service failure, you should get some output to the screen. telling you what file was the source of this. Now, this is unless this is such a critical failure that the system just dies before it's able to bring that up. And if that's the case, then we're going to talk about logging the boot process so that you can identify the file that's giving you the problem. And of course, there's also logon failures as well. So whether the machine is unable to locate a domain controller, that could be indicative of a network issue, or whether there's maybe a corrupt profile so that that user is not able to get logged on. And so really, without dealing with the specifics of, hey, we've got this situation, how do we fix it? The idea is you've got to determine what is the root cause of this problem that you're having. And typically it'll be within one of these areas. Oh, I just kept talking about that, didn't I? So post failures, initial startups, here we go. Oh, yeah, they mentioned the wonderful non-system disk error. That's basically the system's way of telling you, I'm trying to read the operating system, and there's nothing there. Now, it can be a bad entry in the BCD. So if you were editing the BCD just before that, then you reboot the system, and all of a sudden it's going to the wrong place, you get an error like that. Or it could be a critical hardware failure. You just don't know. The startup files could be missing or corrupt. And they mentioned here you can use your recovery tools, such as Windows RE. And we'll get to that in a bit. Driver and service failures. They mentioned here you see the progress bar that tells you how the kernel is loading, and typically after that point you'll see that in the midst of that trying to load up is when you'll get that error about a driver or service. One thing they mentioned you can do is you can use last known good configuration. Your advanced boot options, so you reboot the machine, you hit F8 to come up in the advanced boot options. One of those options is last known good. Last known good, what happens when you log on is a snapshot is made of the hardware key of the registry. H key local machine, current control set. There's a snapshot made of that current control set hive in the registry, and it's copied to H key local machine, current control set 001. And what was in 001 before is moved to 002, and then what was in current control sets moved to 001. This is a snapshot taken basically of all the hardware drivers and settings when you successfully logged onto the system. So if you've made some changes to the system and you find it before you log on, let's say you update some video drivers and it screws things up so bad you can't log on. Well, all you have to do is reboot and go to last known good, and that will undo everything you've just done during that last session. However, once you've logged on successfully, that last known good configuration isn't going to do any good anymore because Microsoft only supports rolling back from the previous logon. There's also the safe mode options for us. Again, under the advanced boot options, you hit F8. You're able then to see all of our advanced boot options, which include 3 safe modes. A safe mode with command prompt, safe mode with networking, and just typical safe mode. Safe mode boot of the operating system allows, basically brings the OS up with minimal drivers. Okay, absolute minimal drivers. You're going to have, it's going to look ugly. You're going to have 16 colors. It's going to be 640 by 480. I mean, it's the absolute, most backwards compatible, just absolute minimum configuration. Then you can make changes in there and then reboot the system, and those changes that you made will stick. There's also all the safe mode options log the boot process as well, so they end up sticking a log file on the hard drive so that you can go through and see what files are being loaded up, and therefore know which one was, which one is the culprit. When you see each individual file, each individual driver as it's being loaded, and all of a sudden you see where the log file stops, well, then that tells you where the problem resides. And they mention here using Device Manager. You go into Device Manager, you find your Ethernet card, your video adapter, whatever, and if you see that little yellow circle with the warning sign in it, or the red circle with the exclamation point in it, there's a problem. You can also then go there to the properties under the Device Manager, and you can attempt to do a driver rollback as well. But that's getting a little beyond the startup phase. One thing you can certainly do during your logon, they mention here, is you hold down the Shift key when you're logging on to prevent programs from loading up. If you've got any programs that will auto load, anything that is set to auto run, then holding down shift while you're coming up will suppress that behavior, so they won't be able to do that. And so you can do that then to figure out, again, where the problem's coming from. So now, talking about the Windows recovery tools, I mentioned already the alternate boot options. Also, there's the startup and recovery dialog box. If you take a look, there's the boot options we already discussed. Here's the startup and recovery dialog box. You right-click on computer, you go to properties, you go to the advanced options, and there you'll find a tab for startup and recovery. Now notice here at the top it says your default operating system. Well, this used to be an entry that we'd make in the boot.ini file. Well, all this GUI is doing right here is editing the BCD. So you could do it manually with the command line tool, or you could just come here and do this. Now, the other things, of course, that we can't do here for the BCD, but this, basically choosing the default OS if you're in a multiple boot environment and how long it's going to use to count down before it chooses the default OS. That's going to be right here under our startup and recovery. Now, the system configuration tool, you've got to go to Start Run and type msconfig. This allows you to see the services. This allows you to see what's going on your machine when it fires up. So notice here we can give it a normal startup. We can tell it to do a normal startup, a diagnostic startup, or a selective startup, where we choose whether we're doing just the system services, startup items, or we want to revert back to original boot config. If we go into the boot option here you'll see the selection of the default operating system. This is what we just looked at under the advanced options for the system, which is editing the BCD like I mentioned. Under the services, you see here all of the services that are loading up and running on the system. Quite an extensive list. I do like to hit this switch right here to hide all Microsoft services. Now what you're seeing are just the services that are not Microsoft. And of course, these are going to be the first ones that are going to be suspect. Not that there's ever a Microsoft service that's not giving us a hard time, but typically speaking, if we're having problems with one, it's not going to be a Microsoft service. What runs on startup? And so we can take a look at that here and see what things are being kicked off on startup and get rid of some of those. And then different tools that are available to us and that we can launch right from here. So you see we can kick off the event viewer from here, look at the system properties from here, so forth and so on. So that's what you see in the system configuration tool. You can enable boot logging. There's 4 options to do this. The 3 safe modes, and then there's one called enable boot logging. And so you have to use F8 to get into the advanced boot options. You make the selection of enable boot logging, and then when you boot up, you're going to end up with a text file that's going to document for you everything that is loading up during the boot process. Now, Windows RE is a recovery environment. You get to Windows RE by putting your media in your machine and booting to it, just like you're going to do an install. Except when you do an install, you're going to make a selection in the center of the dialog box that says, install Windows. If you look in the lower left-hand corner of the box, there'll be an option that'll say repair. When you choose repair, it's going to launch a little GUI, and that GUI is going to give you these 5 tools. So you can do a startup repair. What this is going to do is this is going to take the files that are necessary for startup, it'll take backup that it has of them, and it will restore them. A system restore will restore back from an image that we've taken earlier to restore, what's going at the point in time backup you did of the system. A system image recovery, if you set up a disk, if you set up to do a system recovery disk, it will basically create a VHD file, a virtual hard drive file, that's a backup of the entire system, and you can use that to recover. There's also the Windows Memory Diagnostic tool. This is a tool that will verify the health of your RAM. And, RAM can go bad. And usually when it does, it's very difficult to detect because it's not consistent. and it's a real pain. So we've used third-party tools for a long time to check for the integrity of our RAM. Now Microsoft bakes one in that's right there, part of Windows 7. And of course, you can also launch the command prompt from here and have most of the tools that we would use in the command prompt at your disposal. Pretty much here, you're going to have the tools available from Windows PE rather than the full assortment of tools that you get under a normal Windows command prompt, because this is just something very small, lightweight, loaded up into memory. It's not the full operating system. I have absolutely no use at all for branch cache. Branch cache is a feature, and the only reason they describe it here rather than in the server class is that it's possible to use branch cache in a client-only mode, and they've got an illustration here of it. You can use it in this client-only mode, is called the distributed cache mode, or you can do a hosted cache. With a distributed cache mode, basically what you'll see here in our drawing, what you see right here is that our users, where's my mouse? Oh, there it is. What you basically see here is there's a share up at headquarters, and users are grabbing information off of that share. Well, when you use branch cache, you're assuming, you know what, I want to not use the WAN link as heavily as possible. I want to try to lighten up the traffic on that link between this network and headquarters. So with the distributed cache, what happens is, okay, let's start this part of the discussion all over again. I apologize. My wife called, and I needed a break, so I talked to her for a few minutes. So let's get back to this, figure out where I left off. So we're taking a look at this beautiful graphic, and we'll just take a look at it here first. Like I said, you're looking to minimize use of this WAN link here, and so the purpose of branch cache is so that when you download something, when you're sitting here at the branch office and you download something from headquarters, that download gets distributed to multiple Windows 7 machines in your environment. So that when the next person goes to download it, somebody's sitting here and he goes to download it, instead of going up here and across the WAN link, he goes and gets the bits and pieces of it from these machines here. Okay, here's a problem I have with that. The first thing is, look at what they're illustrating this with, laptops. Well, if I'm using laptops, what am I doing? I'm caching this stuff on machines that are highly mobile, so the odds of them not being there from time to time is going to be even bigger. And so it seems like all they're doing is making their own peer-to-peer network, which we spend half our life trying to snuff out peer-to-peer networks. So that's a distributed cache. Now the hosted cache, I understand even less than a distributed cache. Because with the hosted cache, you've got a Server 2008 machine here, and you set it up so that when downloads are taken from here, they actually come to you, you go get the download, and then you cache it here and hand it out. So when the next person needs it, they just go here to you. Again, if I'm going to have a server dedicated to this, why not use one of the file share methods supported by Microsoft, such as DFS, a distributed file system, or just set up a whole other file server. So branch cache is what it is. I just don't really like it. The backup and restore facility that we have in Windows 7 is actually not bad. Like most backups, you can, I'll just go here and type backup, and here is backup and restore. It says, okay, Windows backup has not been set up. I haven't done that on this box because I don't use Windows backup, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. And so it will get the backup started, and all it's going to do is give me a GUI in which I can point and click and choose files and folders that I wish to back up, and then the destination to which I wish to back them up to. So it says right here, select where you want to save your data. So I'll tell it I'm going to put it on this drive. Yeah, I know there's not enough space for a system image. So I'm going to let me choose. Instead of doing a whole backup where the system will do an image, I'll say let me choose, and then I get to pick and choose the files and the folders I want to include in that backup. Notice here, include a system image of drive C. So this would allow you to do a restore that will put the machine back to the particular point in time. And this would be the restore that would be supported by Microsoft's Windows recovery environment. So I'm not going to back this up, but I just want you to see that the GUI is very self-explanatory. It's very intuitive. All you have to do is launch it and answer the questions, and you're ready to roll. And here you see a screenshot of the backup being performed, and you can see here that it's in progress, and they'll tell you what they're backing up, when the next one's scheduled, so forth and so on. So nothing too magical there. You do need to have backups. You know, whether you use this or whether you use a third party, you do need to make sure you've got some way to back up, because it's never a question of do I need a backup, it's when do I need a backup. And so as soon as you think think of the worst possible time to lose your data, that's exactly when it'll happen. There in the backup options, you saw how you could create a system image, and that does, like it says, creates an image of the entire hard drive, and it saves it as a VHD file. Microsoft is really buying into the whole virtual platform. If you had any doubt about that, I can just show you right here when we go take a look at managing our computer. And we look here under disk management. It's got to connect up to the service. And then I'm just going to right click and wait till you see what one of the new options is. This is unique to Windows 7 and Server 2008. Really, any second now, it's just going to do its thing. What it's going to offer me to do once it connects to the service is I'll be able to right-click and choose create and mount a VHD. So I'll be able to create a VHD and then mount it as though it were a separate hard drive. Well, the reason that's important, and I'm not going to wait for this to catch any longer, because basically all you're going to see is that context menu that I described. When you choose to create a system image backup, it does that exact same thing. It basically takes the contents of an entire hard drive and it copies them to a VHD file so that it can then mount that file and use it to restore your original location with in case of a critical failure. That didn't work very well. Okay, and then I mentioned here the second option is the system repair disk. When you do a system repair disk, this will allow you to do a restore from the image. The system repair disk is not a backup. It's simply a disk that contains the tools that allows you to do a restore. And you'll notice here it basically kicks off a little dialog box that pops up and says, hey, you're going to boot your computer up to this, so give me a blank drive, give me a blank disk in the drive, and let's go. And you can boot up to it. It's got all the recovery tools on it, and you remember that one of the options under those recovery tools was to allow you to use a system image to restore. And that pretty much finishes up our discussions for tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and get this posted. Don't forget that JMac will be with you on Thursday. Don't forget to read hard and do well on your quiz for Thursday. And I will have, by the time you get to class Thursday night, your labs will be posted. All right, you guys take care, and I'll see you next Tuesday.